life spent with you. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy.
You may recall in the lesson this morning, I talked about being in a room, whether a hospital room or hospice care or something like that, and hearing the last words of someone spoken. It's rather ominous, and you carry those thoughts with you. I think of Brother Ed Fredericks, and Ed was alone, and truly he had a lot of thoughts, but he couldn't express them fairly well. But I went to see him. We had got him into a hospice care situation, and was talking to the nurses there and the caregivers, and they told me it was his time. And I knew it. We had known it for a few weeks. So I went in to talk to him, and he just looked at me, and he had a tear in his eye. And I said, "It's going to be all right, Ed. It's going to be all right." And his last word was, "Really? Really?" Now, you could take that a couple of different ways. But I know Ed was tired. I know he was alone. He tried to make it after his wife passed, ran into a lot of difficulties. But his last word was really. "Ed, it's going to be all right." Really? Now, before that, he and I talked a lot. Al had gone over and talked with Ed as well, because it was more than evident that his time was short. And so when we know somebody's time is short, we put a premium on what they say, how they say it, because it says so much about their life. And that's what we find in Christ. This morning we talked about listen to the words of Christ's blood, not audibly, not things that were verbalized at that time, but rather in a broad sense what they do speak. But I want us to go back to the cross, and I want us to listen. Consider the last words of Jesus. On the overhead, you can see some famous last words. And one I really kind of liked is the one by Leonardo da Vinci. "I have offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have." I mean, Leonardo was a master at everything he did. He was a true Renaissance man. But I failed, is what he said. I failed to capture. And you look at the paintings that he did, he captures truly those things that he thought necessary. Richard Feynman, who was involved in the Manhattan Project, the development of the atomic bomb, he said, "This dying is boring." He'd lived on the cutting edge of science for years, decades. Dying is boring. Groucho Marx, "This is no way to live." That was his last words. Winston Churchill, "I'm bored with it all." And then he passed away. Now, we've looked at last words before as a send up for something else. But do you notice something that's kind of thematic? Is the realm of boredom. Joan Crawford shows the caustic nature of the woman that she was. Don't you dare ask God to help me. She told one of her caregivers, don't you dare. How callous, how truly callous it was for her to say that. But then you contrast all of that with Stephen as he's being stoned to death. Lord, do not hold this sin against them. See, each thing that's said by these individuals, telling about their character, about their nature, about their lives. And when we look at Jesus on the cross and look at the words that he said, I think it's very telling about who Christ is, what Christ is all about. It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh profits no benefit. The words that I have spoken to you, they are spirit, they are life. So as we begin to look at this lesson, our thoughts, our focus is on the words spoken by Christ on the cross. They resonate. They scream loudly across the time and the expanse of time. At lunch this afternoon, as we were getting ready to leave, the restaurant for the most part was pretty quiet. Wasn't a lot of people there. And then all of a sudden, bang, crash. Joy about jumped out of her skin because that sound resonated. She asked the waiter. The waiter said, no, I've gotten used to it. The thing about the words of Christ, they need to be fresh. They need to be considered from time to time. And they echo, just like that sound echoed throughout the restaurant today. They echo through the millennia since he died. So let's look at them and see what we can take away. Remember that while he's going through this, he's hearing the jeering, the ridicule, the maligned. It's what he's hearing. Now, having worked in a hospital and being there when people go on surgery, listening to the things they said, one of the things that was told all surgical personnel, you say. Watch how you say it. Because even though you may think that they're not paying attention or they're asleep, they still can hear it. It still has an impact. And Jesus was there in agony. And he heard the people hurling abuse. Now, we just have a smattering of what was said. But you can imagine some of the things that weren't recorded being cast at him. But as he's on the cross, hearing all of this, after having been beaten, bloodied, spat upon, humiliated as he walks through the city streets carrying his cross. And some would even argue that modesty was not a concern. I don't know if that's true or not. But he's walking through the city streets, carrying his own implement of torture. And as he's there on the cross, his hands have been pierced, his feet have been affixed, he's in agony, and he has the wherewithal to say in Luke the 23rd chapter, verse 34. And remember now what's going on. His His breathing is labored. He's trying to catch every breath. So if you've ever heard an asthmatic or someone with COPD or someone who's got long COVID, it would sound terrible. Father, forgive them, for they do not for they do not know what they're doing. That's not even close to what it must have sounded like, but it's as close as I could get. Breathless, barely getting out. Yeah, kind of like joy. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Can't get a full breath. And I got to tell you, sometimes up here on Sunday, when I'm struggling with long COVID and my breathing's not what it should be, but I wasn't struggling for every breath. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. Well, even before he was taken, he told them that's exactly what he was going to do. He was going to deal with sin. Well, we talked about that this morning. So let's go to another. Jesus on the cross. The two others that are crucified with him. At one point, they were both hurling abuse at him. And so ultimately, the one turns to him and asks to be remembered when Jesus comes into his kingdom. Jesus turns to him and says, again, trying to get every breath. He's part of the crucifixion was to bring upon suffocation. Do y'all remember Sandra Rader, who was a member here? Sandra Rader struggled from COPD. And when Sandra would really be in an attack of her COPD, she would be taking the medication. She would be doing the breathing treatments. And she still would struggle to get out each and every word. That's what Jesus was going through on the cross. The excruciating pain, yes, but not being able to breathe. So when he said, truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Tremendous. Now, that brings up another issue. By Jesus taking this stance, he's forgiving that thief. He's forgiving him. Who but deity can forgive sins? And if he presumes otherwise, then he has violated the law. He is found condemned by the law, and he no longer can be acceptable as our propitiation for sins. Look at Luke, the 5th chapter, verse 21. And the scribes and the Pharisees began to reason, saying, who is this man who speaks blasphemy? Who can forgive sins but God alone? Jump over to the 7th chapter. You can see it on the overhead. And in the 7th chapter, we're going to drop down into verse 49. And those who were reclining at table with him began to say to themselves, who is this man who even forgives sins? So, by and through this statement, today you will be with me in paradise. Jesus is giving an affirmation of who he is. Who can forgive sins but God alone? He's deity. He is the Emmanuel that was talked about back in the Old Testament. He is the fulfillment of the prophecies. But these words are extremely telling of who Jesus is. Now, again, some denominationalists, they go, well, we looked at the thief on the cross and he was saved by faith only. Well, that might be true. But when Jesus forgave him, it was prior to his death on the cross. Once his death on the cross came into effect, the only way to get forgiveness of sins was by and through obedience to the gospel. People try to look for little things that they can take and make into something big and deviate from the pattern. But you got to look at the whole picture. Remember Leonardo. I wish that I could have painted better, basically, is what he said. Leonardo, look at all you've done. Look at it all. You'll be amazed what you see. When we look at the full picture, it remains consistent. There is no variation. There is no shifting shadow. It holds true. Look again. Try to imagine the scene on the cross. The horror is there. Pain. He's writhing in pain. And his eyes meet that of his mother. This past week and the week before, Linda underwent an ablation. And then I went and had one on Monday. And they're really quite pain-free. You get a little stick in the back, and then they put the probe in. And there's this moment of about 5 to 10 seconds that I call a boy howdy moment, where it just kind of, and your body just tenses. But it's 5 to 10 seconds. But when Linda had it done, she said that it caused her leg to twitch and lift up. Well, imagine your whole body going through that. That's what Jesus was going through. The nerves have been accelerated and injured. And now he looks down and sees his mother. His mother looks up at him. She's got tears in her eyes. I mean, I can't count the number of times Linda's had tears in her eyes because one of the boys got hurt. Had to take him to the ER. The mother's heart is breaking. He looks down and sees his mother. Tears undoubtedly running down her face. And he says to his mother, John the 19th chapter, verse 26, woman, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, behold your mother. And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own household. Even as he's dying, he's got compassion. This conscious and sympathetic of all others. His mother. Mom, I want to see you're taken care of. John, will you take care of her? Now, I put it in a very common tonality, but that's what was going on. Only under the excruciating pain and torment that he was enduring. This talks about his compassion. It wasn't about him as he's on the cross. And it could have easily been, help me. Let me just pull myself off the cross. I liked what Al said several years ago. Something very poignant. We were surrounding the table. And he said, the nails didn't keep Jesus on the cross. What kept him there was love. I agree with that. That amount of love was what kept him there. But these things that he says are indicative of the human being that he was. That he had emotions like you and I. He had feelings like we do. And here, this level of compassion is fully on display. If this doesn't touch your heart, then I don't know what would. That here is this young man in his 30s being brutalized for something he never did. And now looking down at his mother, feeling her pain, the emotional pain, and exhibiting compassion. But we're not done. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why? And again, remember, it's not with a robust voice. By this time, he's been agonizing hours. He'd been up all night at several different tribunals, beaten, scourged, humiliated, degraded. Oh, my God, why have you forsaken me? Anguish, absolute anguish. He's in extreme pain, distress, and yes, anxiety. His blood pressure had to be off the charts. The pounding of the heart in his chest had to be beyond comprehension. A few years ago, sitting in the living room, and all of a sudden I felt something. And Linda looked at me and she goes, "What's wrong?" I said, "Look." And you could see every beat of my heart, my skin pulsating. And she said, what's going on?" I said, "I think one of the leads on the pacemaker broke." She goes, "Really?" I go, "Yeah." "Well, what are we going to do?" I said, "Well, we get in the car and you drive me to the hospital. And if I die, you sue." I really said that. I'm so embarrassed about that. But you could see each beat of the heart. And we got there and they couldn't fix it that night. And it took a few more weeks before they were able to fix it. But you could see it. Now, that's a tiny little thing. But imagine the full heart pounding and beating. Blood pressure, yes, off the charts. Because when you're anxious, under stress, your blood pressure rises. I was telling somebody this morning, talking about blood pressure. And I go, man, that's what your blood pressure is? And he went, yeah. I go, mine, 116/70. What? Yeah. But that's with 16 medications. Oh. Christ had no medications. So imagine how he must have been feeling. 2 Corinthians 5:21. We made reference to it this morning about Jesus being our scapegoat. He made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God through him. Yeah, he was going to be our scapegoat, and he became our scapegoat. And thanks be to God for that. So yeah, anguish, yes. I'm thirsty. I'm thirsty. We go into restaurants Sundays. What do you all have to drink? I'm not a big drinker. I don't drink a lot of water. I don't drink a lot of anything. And when I get thirsty, I get thirsty. And it's usually in the summer after 5 o'clock. And then I'll drink a gallon of something. And I'll just kind of like a cactus that way, or a camel. But his tongue is cleaving to the roof of his mouth. And he says breathlessly, I'm thirsty. It speaks to his suffering, the human side of what he went through, what he endured. It is finished. Right on the end, he's going to die. It's finished. And what that tells me is victory. I've seen it all the way through. I've been victorious. And the joy. Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. I've done it, Father, and it's over. And I commit my spirit. I saw somewhere where somebody was trying to explain how somebody could look at death in a positive way. And Christ here is looking in that way. And they said, well, it's kind of like a dog. And a dog is really happy because he can look and see on the other side of the sliding glass window. His master is there. He can be so happy. He'll be running in circles. His tail will be wagging because he knows that the door is going to slide open and he'll be with his master. That's what Christ was experiencing here. Father, I've done it. I've done what you wanted. I become the scapegoat for their sins. The victory is mine. And soon I'll be with you. The absolute joy. Well, you tie that all in with Romans, the first chapter, verses 3-4. Declared with power to be the Son of God. Seated at the right hand of the Father in the heavenly places. God has made him both Lord and Christ. This Jesus whom you've crucified. That's Acts 2nd chapter, verses 33-36. So those are the last words of Jesus. And when you stop and think of them, they make perfect sense. Because what they speak of, they speak of forgiveness. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Speaks of salvation. Today, I say to you, you will be with me in paradise. Compassion. When he talked to John, talked to Mary. Woman, behold thy son. Take her into your home. Compassion. Anguish. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Suffering. I'm thirsty. Victory. It's finished. And the ultimate joy. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. That's what the words of Christ say. And that's why it's so important to go back, to look at them, to see them, to appreciate them once more. The lesson is yours this afternoon. But I trust that with what we talked about this morning, what we talked about this afternoon, give you a little better appreciation when you think about, consider how Christ's blood speaks better than the blood of Abel. And the final words that Jesus uttered while he was on the cross. It speaks volumes about who Jesus was, the pattern and the plan for all of mankind. Well, if there's any here that might be subject to the invitation in any way, the gospel invitation is extended to you while we stand and sing the song Select.